So welcome everyone. My name is Rachel, and this is the 2022 SORTI conference. Note that this session is being recorded and will be available later on the OSF meeting platform, and you can see the link in the chat. And before I introduce our plenary presenter, like I said, I have a few announcements. We ask that all participants familiarize themselves with the code of conduct available at the SORTI website. It's also going to be in the chat. For detailed information on all the events, please check the conference information pack, which is also copied in the chat now. And some information about the conference is available on the SORTI website, sorti.org/events, but this doesn't include the links to the events, and you can find the list of all the Zoom links in a Google Sheet, which you can find in the conference pack or in the Shiny app. We just ask that you keep the Zoom link private, and if you see that people are interested in joining, just encourage them to participate. And we do have waivers, fee waivers. We try to accommodate everyone, so please encourage people to subscribe and join. Also note that some discussions are happening in the Slack. And you can see in the conference pack information on how to navigate Slack and how to access the channels, the discussion channels for each event. And we're very excited for this plenary and all the other plenaries at the conference. We're very much looking forward to the interactive events as well, where you can participate in shaping this open, reliable, and transparent future that we want for ecology and evolutionary biology. And we hope that you find one or more of these events to attend. We're going to have them happening through all this, the next 2 years, 2 days, sorry. So for a few details about this plenary, first note that each one of you can turn on or off the automatic captioning. It's a button at the bottom of the screen. And you can click on the live transcription button. We invite everyone to ask questions using the Q&A function. And while the presentation is happening, and also you can upvote other questions that you find interesting. And after Paula has given her awesome presentation, we're gonna be selecting some questions from the Q&A in order of number of upvotes and read them to the presenter. After 15 minutes of Q&A, we're going to leave this webinar and move to another Zoom meeting where the link is available at the conference information pack. And also the co-host is going to add the link here once we're done. And we're going to be divided into breakout rooms so we can have a more formal and face-to-face interaction with the presenter and with the other attendees. And you have the chance to ask any of the remaining questions that were not answered, and we can talk about, and conversation will also keep going the Slack channel, so can also use that. Okay, so now without further ado, I want to introduce Paula Martinez. So Paula is the software project coordinator of the Australian Research Data Commons, ARDC, and Research Software Alliance, ReSA, community manager. She's leading projects of the software program to see, shape, and sustain research software. She's the co-chair of the International Fair for RS working group, co-host of the Visible Research Software Interest Group, and steering committee member of the Research Software Engineers RSE-AUNZ Association. She has developed strategic planning and work packages to lead change in recognition of research software as a first-class scholarly output of research. After completing a PhD in applied bioinformatics, she transitioned from being a research software engineer to a trainer, And then she became an advocate of research best practices and now working on incentivizing policy implementation to recognize authors of research software. So without further ado, welcome Paula to give her presentation. Oh, Paula, you're muted.
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, everyone. My name is Paula. I'd like to start by acknowledging Sorti for inviting me today. You know, being one of the plenary speakers, it's quite exciting, and talking in front of people who believe in open, reliable, and transparent research is thrilling. In Australia, we introduce ourselves by paying respects to the country of the oldest living cultures in the world. I am in Brisbane, Australia. The land of the Yagara people is where I live and work. I acknowledge and celebrate the old, past, present, and emerging leaders of this land, all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on whose traditional lands we meet. I come here with respect and I welcome you all. Thank you all for your attendance and those watching the recording. I am honored to be listed among the plenary speakers lineup of this conference, and I am excited to share the work that I'm passionate about. I believe that each of us can play a role in advocating for better science, and especially those of you who are taking the time to join me in this conversation. This is more than anything a motivational talk. I'm going to share some examples of collaborative work that I am part of, and I'll throw a few tips that you can use in your journey to motivate others to respond to negativity and to support others in doubt. My goal is to send a message by asking you to reflect on your practice and maybe get everyone excited about co-sharing at the end of this. I'm going to pose a lot of questions, so let's start. Let me share my screen now. Okay. Do you see my screen?
Yes, it's perfect.
Good. I'd like you to pay attention to the little details of this picture because I'm going to make a reference of it, and I hope you notice what the reference is. Yes, you can find and access the slides via the DOI listed on the screen. You can also find it on the chat and on Slack. I'm going to share the link with you. The title of this talk is Why Don't We Share Data and Code? And it's a reference to a paper that a few Sorti members and I co-wrote during the time when I was invited. More details in the course of this presentation. In attempting to change the narrative here, I will refer to code as in all digital outputs from research to highlight that we have already achieved a lot of conscious responses in sharing data and that we need to do a similar effort in sharing code and other outputs. Like I said, I'm going to pose a lot of questions inviting you to reflect, starting with, why do we write publications if not to communicate science? What concern are we trying to solve? And the message is the way that we communicate science is evolving with the variety of outputs we can create. But at the end, who is benefiting from this all? This talk is framed for digital natives. We are generally identified as the millennial generation and the generations that come after. We are the ones who have spent our entire lives surrounded by computers, by digital devices, and the world of social media. So think again of the published paper, of the many, many versions before the submission, the data and the code used to support the results, and in all, the actual work. Are we communicating well? We need to improve the way that we communicate what matters to us. We need to communicate well, and we need to communicate better. Because what matters to us depends on the creator and also on the receiver, here are a few examples. And the example that I want to bring to you in this talk is about code in the scientific literature that will help us do more effective research. So code comes in different shapes and serves different purposes. So one of those could be analysis code, which is very simple, a few lines of codes, AKA scripts, to run jobs, to create visuals, to clean your data. And the sad part of it is that there's a lot of it, and we keep reinventing the wheel in this section. The second shape of code that we see present in publications is methods implemented. This is when we get theoretical models and we automate them using code. With a bit of emphasis in the importance of this, the benefit can be really amplified. It can be used in your domain, but it also can be used across domains. And the third type of code or research software is infrastructure. So it's code, it comes in the shape of programs or applications or interfaces or even libraries that facilitate accessibility. It can be used even by those who don't know how to write code, and it's built mainly for the benefit of many. And the question here is, what kind of code are you writing? And when you discover what is that, why does it matter to us? Sharing data and code enhances our understanding of science. And I hope you're all converted, but I need to say this, which means we and others are able to build on the work and increase the efficiency across the entire scientific ecosystem, as it can be verified, as it is transparent, and it leads to less duplication of effort. So let's keep in mind who is benefiting from this. Another question, who is looking at your code, or who do you think it's looking? This is a recent study, a survey of researchers, code sharing and code reuse practices. This study was led from PLOS, and it studied computational biology journals and how researchers were sharing code. And it describes that 75% of the respondents looked at the code associated with the articles they are reading. And why do you think is that? So they had two answers. 70% of those have a desire to improve the understanding of the paper results by reading and accessing the code. And very importantly, in responding, what's the benefit of sharing data and code is that 48% of those respondents also want to reuse and adapt the code in their own research. So this shows benefits for us as an author to create trustability, for the reviewers to understand it better, for the collaborators to make it more efficient, and finally for the users and the reusers of code. Now that I posed so many questions to you, I'd like to go into offering a few tips that you can look at. To offer these references, you will think about them when you wish you knew where to find more information. And also when you would like to share these references with others who would like to learn more. I have 3 slides of this type, one for each of the 3 pillars of the Research Software Alliance, or ReSA. The first one is people. What can we do to share data and code? We are the people. People can create commitments, can advocate, can produce, and can amplify guidance. People is not just one, so don't work alone. I have listed here some international communities that you can refer to when you need to lift each other up in your academic journey. SORTI, of course, you know it well. the free ourknowledge.org to get your ideas out there and to find supporters. The Turing Way, which is a collaborative work that is aimed to be borderless and produce guidance for everyone. Openscapes, to learn from a community of champions. The Carpentries, to teach foundational coding and data skills. Metadocencia, to teach others, to teach valuing their own context. The Research Software Alliance, or ReSA, to bring software communities to collaborate on the advancement of the research software ecosystem. And the FAIR4IS community, to make research software more findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. I have also spent a few more minutes on this slide to draw your attention to the preprint from Gomez et al. 2022. We submitted, "Why don't we share data and code? Perceived barriers and benefits to public archiving practices." It is now available for you to read via MetaArchive. And also a shout out, it's the inspiration for my title, for the title of this talk. What can we do in policy? With this slide, I want to reinforce that change can happen, and it is happening. In PLOS Computational Biology, they study how much authors share code. From the 53% in 2019 to 61% in 2020, this rose to 73% of research articles published in 2021. The new policy was implemented in early 2021, requiring authors to make public any code directly related to the results of the article upon the publication of the work. So this is one example, and I invite you to read more about this. But in policy, there's also many other policies that don't come only from journals, but here is a list that you might appreciate. CARS Access has an ever-developing list of software citation policies, which is another aspect of reinforcing data and code sharing to support research outcomes. The third slide and the third pillar of ReSA is infrastructure. What can we do in infrastructure? Infrastructure is all about building the right places to enable open science, reuse, citation, etc. I invite you to read this blog post from Grenet and Tirolmai. It was very interesting in preparing for my talk because they said we should encourage scientific replicability by addressing the underlying issues that inhibit code sharing. So it's not about just telling researchers what they should do, but it's building those infrastructures to make it easy to share code. And to point to you to some already available infrastructure that you can look at, I'll start with the Consortium of Scientific Software Registries and Repositories called CiteCodes. CiteCodes has an open list, and it's also open for additions of new registries and repositories that are relevant for ecology. I am citing 3 of them. COMSIS, the International Data Initiative, or EDI, and the Distributed Active Archive Center, or DAC. So these are places where you can store your code and share it more easily. And it will also have all the information around your code, your digital outputs, including your data sets. You can put lots of descriptions and make it more findable. Also, I like to cite a generalist framework and a leader of open science, the Open Science Framework, OSF.io. A project with a great ambition to become the world library of code is Software Heritage. A cross path to make registries understand each other or to make them interoperable. In other words, it's Code Meta. And another community project to enable your code to be citation ready is the citation file format, or CFF. So I put all the links here, and you have access to the slides for when you want to explore more. Where are we now? We have communities, we have policy, and we have infrastructure. And the question is, why don't we share data and code? So we need to think about being coherent among our culture, our strategic intent, and our priorities to make the change happen. Let's now talk about culture change. I think culture change is what we are trying to live through our everyday lives. Culture stands as an important foundation for every successful group of people, and I see Sortie as an inspiration, and I believe in open, reliable, and transparent science. I think we have a shared culture from our attended beliefs. Our strength is to influence change that sticks. We are creating culture change to get to where we want to be by discussing with thoughtful people at different levels throughout, such as in conferences, with the policymakers, with the funders, and just with everyday researchers. Look back at the 3 slides of the what we can do if you find yourselves a bit lost in where to start. But most importantly, change is in you. It is a fundamental part of growth, and effective change comes from within. And this is a quote from the book Developing Effective Citizen Engagement from Basler et al. In 2008. Moving a bit more, this is a joint responsibility of funders, publishers, and the scientific community. We as researchers, we have the right to ask. Publishers have the right to accommodate to those questions, and funders have to be the enablers to have better communication of the different types of knowledge that we are creating. And importantly, to enable that all of those outcomes are interconnected. And one example for you is the researcher ID ORCID. If you have an ORCID ID, you can interlink all of your research outputs, say publications, data sets, code, and even your collaborators and your affiliations. Going a bit into the bigger picture, UNESCO regards science as a human right. So when we ask the questions to ourselves, who is the beneficiary of all of this? And why do we have to evolve in the way that we communicate science? Nowadays, we see more often international recommendations, and not only those recommendations exist, but different countries have already been signatories of those recommendations, which means they are accountable. I'd like to start by mentioning some of them. You might have heard of them, and if you haven't, I'll invite you to read more about those. Top is the Transparency and Openness Promotion Guidelines from the Center of Open Science. The OECD Principles and Guidelines for Access to Research Data from Public Funding, which has an amendment in 2021 that includes sharing code, models, algorithms, etc. The UNESCO Recommendation on Open Science, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, or DORA, the Hong Kong Principles for Assessing Researchers, and since 2016, the FAIR Principles, and since 2022, the FAIR Principles for Research Software. Please try to read a bit more about them, especially if you're trying to encourage other people. Accessibility. It's also another motivation of why we should care about this. Our privilege to work on innovative problems to find solutions gives us the responsibility to enable other people participation in the understanding, in the review, and the reuse. We might come from some countries where data is more accessible, where we can create data. In other countries they can't do it, or we can have access to hardware or compute that other people don't have access to. And it's our responsibility to share those results, not by just saying, this is my result, but also saying how I got to that result. And because this is a motivational talk, I want to start wrapping up with all of this is a construct, but it's possible with self-drive. Why does it matter to us? Why don't we share data and code if it signals confidence already when you do it, if it shows the integrity of your work, if it builds trust in the community, it opens doors to old and also new collaborators. And in summary, it advances science. The goal is a conscious decision to share the things that matter and also think, why don't we do it in the first place? So one of my last slides is a call to action. Sortie, let's be a community that not only consumes data and code, but also actively contributes to it. And to wrap up, I'd like to thank the Australian Research Data Commons, or ARDC. And if you are in Australia, I welcome you to contact us, and also the Research Software Alliance, or ReSA. And I'm going to give you some space to create ideas and actions that align the missions of these two organizations. The ARDC seeks to accelerate research and innovation by driving excellence in creation, analysis, and retention of high-quality data assets. And we need both. We need the people, we need the policy, and we need the infrastructure to share data and code. If you are in Australia, please contact us. We have a lot of services for researchers that you can interact with for free. And ReSA is an international body, and it seeks to bring together research software communities to collaborate in the advancement of the research software ecosystem. So it works at a larger scale. We try to convene those bodies that are enabling, so those in infrastructure, those that are doing policy, and we're also trying to open up to the community. In July, we are starting with the Research Software Forum. The community forum is a place where you can bring your questions, your discussions, your ideas, and try to find supporters to bring those ideas to life. And now going to the thank you slides, the materials that I have used are all publicly available. I have used 2 templates from Canva presentations. You can find it here, the white call from Modern Minimalist and the orange photo pitch deck. I've also used a picture from pexel.com by Boris Ulsivat, which is the cover photo of this talk. In slide 3, I have flat icon from FreePic, and I'd like to thank Malvika Sharan and Michelle Barker for the support in this presentation preparation and the insightful comments to improve it. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'm open for questions that you might have.
Thank you, Paula. Let me just make sure. Okay, I have every one of you here. Let me check the Q&A. So please, everyone, feel free to use the Q&A. You also have the Slack channel, and you can also send anonymous questions if you want to. You can send questions to the panelists as well. So I have a question here from Caitlin Spooner. What is your favorite example of a time that someone sharing their code achieved a better outcome for their research?
Thanks for that question, Caitlin. I have an example to share. So I was working at the National Imaging Facility in Australia, and we have a commitment to share our data in open formats and also the methodology that was used. So that means the code. This was a PhD candidate who was about to publish the results, and he, without no one requiring him to do the extra effort, he decided to share the data set as a part of the publication, but also all the methodology. This methodology was used by other collaborators, and there was significant interest in contributing to it. And then after a few months working with external collaborators, this became a second publication for this PhD student. So people realized the value of the methodology, work on making it more translated to others, and by being a second publication, he gained the merit and the credit for his extra work. And so we hope that this is not going to be extra work in the future, but it's just part of how we do science overall.
Thank you, Paula. I have a question of my own too. So you mentioned a lot of different, like different challenges and like the different spheres where these challenges come from. Which one would you say is like, to you, it could be seen as like the most critical one, and the one that we as researchers, and especially early career researchers, like what we can do to help with like overcoming this critical challenge?
Yeah, I'd like to refer back to the slide about what can we do in infrastructure. The blog post that I read was very eye-opening, because he said researchers are trying to do their best, and they have little pieces of information scattered around, and they might not be coherent if they move from one institution to another institution. And then it turns out that you have some research outputs in one place and then in another place, and these are not connected. And I think that's one of the challenges that infrastructure has to deal with. It's not just the responsibility of the researchers to enable findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reuse. It's the bigger frameworks that are enabling this. And we acknowledge that it cannot be only one framework, but there needs to be a stronger connection between those existing frameworks. So I think as a researcher, first, not just do the first thing that pops up in your first search, but try to investigate with others who have done this before. Where have you deposited your data? Where have you deposited your code? Did you have any extra reviewers? This is information that it's not so easy to find, but when you talk to people, this comes up, and then you will learn more by these interactions. And then you can also refer to other people what steps you took in order to get to one place.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Paula. Do we have any more questions in the chat?
I actually have a question, if that's okay. I can't seem to write in the Q&A, so I'll just ask it here. So how do you think journals could better implement some of open research practices? How do you think, well, what do you think is the first step for them to facilitate sharing code and sharing data?
I think one of the first steps is understanding what is the need. Instead of putting out a solution that they think is best, first they should ask the researchers. So for example, in my current position, we are doing a survey of how researchers find code, because this question is going to answer the questions that the repositories need to understand. If researchers value, for example, how big is the community, and for example, how much documentation there is in the software, maybe this is something that the repositories should put up front instead of, I don't know, other fields that they think that are more important. And then also the connection. I think we have seen in software policy from journals that they are trying to make it a requirement, put your data and code availability statements, but then the guidance doesn't go too far. It doesn't say where can you do it. And then it's the responsibility of the researcher. And we as new researchers, like I imagine a first year PhD student who hasn't done this before, who might have a note, a very empowering supervisor, might feel lost and put it in a Google Drive, for example, or things that you shouldn't be doing, but just because you don't know where to put it, you just try to do your best. And if the guidance will be, you are required to have an availability statement, and these are the options that we recommend for you to store your software, and these are the recommended parts that you can have highlighted when you share, like for example, who's the author, how do you cite this extra resource, how is this linked to your domain, and mainly what's the purpose of all of this, right? When this guidance is written down, it can actually take action and we don't have to invent solutions.
Thanks for that. Yeah, that's such a good answer. Thanks.
All right, I see another question popping in. So was an anonymous question, how the funders could incentivize researchers to share data and code?
Thank you. And I hope some funders are listening to this talk. I think the best will be to incorporate some instructions when you are applying for funding. So if a funder will have more visibility of what exactly they are funding. For example, some researchers will have, oh, I have this hypothesis, I need to test it, and because it's going to save lives, for example. That might be the pitch that they want to get through the funder in order to get some financial help. But if they said, I am going to build a model to test the different pharmaceutical medicines that I'm going to try, and these different patients, this model is going to be built by a team of 3 to 4 research software engineers, and we are going to gather test examples of 500 people cohorts. And so these things add up to what's the need and who is involved in, and what actually are the tangent outputs or the digital outputs that are going to serve the results of this whole research question. So when they start to, I guess, when you are funded and you read out of 500 applications, 450 say they're going to build more software or they're going to build more frameworks, then they will see the need. Okay, this is something that's happening more and more often. We really need to think about funding those things in a better way. And incentivizing is just part of making it more translatable. Say in the requirements, this is what we would like to see. This is our interest. And I think that could be a start of a changing the current scheme. There might be other things to incentivize as well.
Thank you, Paula. Do we have any more questions? If not, and people don't mind, I actually have another question.
Yes, please. I have so many other things to talk about, but I thought I should keep it short to give you more time for questions.
Yes, no, and please feel free to expand too. I'm actually, my question is like, I'm really curious about your work with the Australian Research Data Commons. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, but I'm interested in, like, it seems like a broad program, and so I'm wondering if you had experience dealing with like open research and transparency, like in different fields. And if there are things that you find it like that are unifying challenges or things that are unique to biology that you may have seen or interacted with.
Okay.
So if
those were two questions, I think.
Yes, yes, yes.
The second about examples on how research deal with transparency and mainly in biology. So I have a background in computer science, and we serve all life sciences. So we work with developing models and we analyze code, but we not only serve medicine or medical sciences, we serve them to study diseases. We also serve evolutionary biology to study how species evolve, and we might serve environmental issues as well, for example, in studies of pollution, and etc. I think because this is already a cross-discipline area, I think everyone came with different challenges and also different solutions. So I guess all people in life sciences, they're just trying to solve a question, but then in the way that we've evolved in our production of data, then we had too much data that we couldn't just analyze it by looking at it. We had to build this automated pipelines to work with that data. And that's when bioinformatics became a very computational field to study DNA with big machines, with implementation of algorithms. And in that sense, because it's all new, we also were pushed to share what we have. So there is a very nice paper to read, like what are the top 100 papers in academia. It's from Nature. And from those 100, the top 10 are research software papers. And one of them is BLAST. It's used for protein analysis. Proteins exist in any living organism, and it has evolved from a simple script to BLAST in different versions for different organisms. It's been maintained for more than 20 years, and this is how we've been pushed. It was a need. It wasn't anyone's idea when they developed the first script that it will go boom. It has more than 5,000 citations, and it continues to evolve because of the need. So that's one example, I think, and how we are the change makers, and we need to lead this change by producing better, more efficient tools and collaborating with each other. And also it is a significant project to mention because it probably started in a small lab like everything else starts. But then because of the need and the requirements from the global community, it is now funded by the Institute of Health, the NIH, the National Institute of Health. And it continues to evolve, and they continue to support it by getting the people who are writing the code, the reviewers, and getting all the feedback from the community. So if you want your project to be maintained for a longer time, just need to start thinking about this community. And not only you, but the funders need to start thinking. But for them to realize how important this project is, then you need to cite this software in all your publications. If hundreds of papers are needing this software, it's like, it would be terrible if it disappears if nobody maintains it, right? But if everyone knows that we need this infrastructure, then I think this is a stronger push also for the funders to keep ongoing efforts in here. Should I go to the second question about my work at ARDC? Yeah, my work at ARDC, I like it very much. It's a national body. We are funded by the government in the Department of Skills and Employment, and it was all a merger of different services. There was the computing capability, the experts into how do we do data stewardship, and also the services of, for example, an aggregator called the Research Data Australia that crawls into research outputs and puts them all together. That's what we're trying to do, connect things. So there were 3 organizations, and then we merged a few years ago, 3 years ago. And just last year, the software program started as an enabler. We also tried to communicate with specific domain communities, like, for example, with ecology or those in the medical sciences. So we have different targets of how to reach out to researchers. But the software program is one of those perpendicular aims. We're trying to reach them all because we notice that you need code to clean your data. You need code to analyze, to collect, to create the results, to inform the results. So you need code and research for every part of your research outputs. And that's why we put together this program. And we are just starting, but we have a strong push to make things better. And I'm really happy to hear any kind of incentive that goes out there. So when I read the report from PLOS 2021 about what happens when we change the policy, and the change is not just 1%, it's almost 10%. And in 1 year, you see how much that can change. Is because I think we are ready. It took a lot of time to make data open, more accessible, and more findable, but we don't need to repeat that long way for code. I think we can shorten it up, and people are very willing to do that now. Also, just to add, in those actions, because we don't do anything alone, we are working a lot with communities. So that's why I've highlighted 2 of those communities in my biography. And those are regional communities, but they are very similar efforts in other parts of the world. For example, the Research Software Engineer chapters, they exist in other countries as well. And they are here for researchers who didn't want to become programmers in the first instance, but now there is a stronger need for them to be able to interact with code in the research life. So there is a place where you can ask questions and feel how others are transitioning in their careers and can help you do the same.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for giving more detail about your organization. Thank you.
Thank you.
On the other side of the globe, I was not familiar, so it's really cool to hear about it.
Yeah, there's an RSE US as well. And for those in Europe, the RSE community in England is one of the biggest ones, and now it's going to be one of the first in-person events after the lockdown. So if you are around, go in September. It's RSE conference month.
ARC?
RSE, Research Software Engineer.
RSE. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. I wasn't aware of it. That's cool. I don't see any more questions popping in. So I was wondering if we want to maybe move this to the informal mixer. So yeah, so Ed is already adding the link in the chat. So you should be able to use this link to join the plenary mixer. So just be a more informal Q&A, and we can also get into smaller groups and chat with each other. So thank you once again, Paula, for the presentation. Round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I guess I'll see everyone at the mixer in a few minutes. All right, thank you.